My name is Emer Hurley and I'm the director of West Cork Literary Festival. So thanks to all of you for being here tonight, to our panelists and to our audience members. Tonight's conversation, Catherine Kerwin is going to be in conversation with Tadhg Coakley, Catherine Ryan Howard and Louise O'Neill. Catherine Kerwin is a Cork-based solicitor and crime writer, and her novel Darkest Truth was published last year, and it's a crime novel set in Cork City. And Catherine is going to be introducing our three speakers and telling us a little bit about their books, as all three of them published new books this summer, since the festival would have taken place. So it's a huge pleasure that they're here with us tonight. And I would just like to thank our funders, the Arts Council of Ireland, Cork County Council and the Cork County Council Library and Arts Services, Volta Ireland and the Creative Europe programme of the European Union for funding the festival every year, and most especially for enabling us to bring online events to audiences and to continue supporting writers in this strangest of years. I'd also like to give a shout out to Bantry Bookshop, or a bookshop in Bantry Town, which, whilst the doors are actually closed, they are still operating, and they're selling. You can contact them online or by phone to order books. You can arrange to collect them. They can post them out to you, and they have copies of books by all of the writers here in stock tonight. Tonight's event is going to last for about an hour, and you'll see at the bottom of the screen there's a little Q&A button. If you have any questions for any of the writers, you can put your question in there, and at some point towards the end of the event, Catherine Kerwin will put a few of the questions to the writers. Other than that, I'm now going to hand you over to Catherine Kerwin, and she will introduce Tadhg, Catherine and Louise to you. So thank you all for being here and enjoy tonight's event.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emer. Welcome everyone to the virtual Bantry for the virtual West Cork Literary Festival Cork Noir event. I think we all missed the real trip to Bantry this year. I know I certainly did. So it's really great to be here tonight instead. So I'm going to start by introducing everybody. And firstly, we've got Catherine Ryan Howard talking about her book, The Nothing Man. From Cork and now based in Dublin, Catherine Ryan Howard is the internationally best-selling writer of 4 highly acclaimed crime novels. Her debut thriller, Distress Signals, was shortlisted for the CWA New Blood Dagger Award. Her second thriller, The Liar's Girl, was shortlisted for the Mystery Writers of America Edgar Award for Best Novel. Her third novel, Rewind, was shortlisted for Irish Crime Novel of the Year and is currently being developed for television. Her fourth novel, which is The Nothing Man, the universally lauded The Nothing Man, was published on both sides of the Atlantic in August 2020. It debuted at #1 in the Irish chart and is shortlisted for Irish Crime Novel of the Year. Catherine previously worked as a travel company administrator and at Disney World in Florida. She's a graduate of Trinity in the English school there. And alongside best-selling authors Carmel Harrington and Hazel Gaynor, she's a founding member of the Inspiration Project. Now, next up, we have Louise O'Neill, who's going to be talking about the After the Silence. From Clonakilty, Louise O'Neill studied English at Trinity and is one of Ireland's best-known writers. She writes a weekly column for The Examiner, and in recent months, as if she's not busy enough, she's added the role of Agony Aunt. In the 6 short years since 2014, Louise has published 5 novels spanning genres from her award-winning YA debut Only Ever Yours to children's to romance. Her second novel, Asking for It, was Irish Book of the Year in 2015 and also became a hugely successful sold-out play at Everyman Cork and at the Abbey. Now comes her most recent novel, After the Silence, which is also shortlisted for an Irish Book Award in the crime category. It's a psychological thriller set off the coast of County Cork on the island of Inisrún. I should have said that Catherine's book, The Nothing Man, is mostly set around Cork City, but also takes a few trips out to the county as well. And then we have Pike Coakley, whose book, Whatever It Takes, we're going to be talking about tonight. Tadhg lives in Cork City. His debut novel, First Sunday in September, was published in 2018 to much acclaim. Donal Ryan, no less, described it as vibrant and authentic, brimming with intensity and desire. Tadhg is widely published as a short story writer, essayist and sports writer in publications ranging from The Stinging Fly to the Irish Examiner. He's also ghostwritten a sports biography of Cork GAA dual star Dennis Collin, published recently. He's now a full-time writer, but in his previous life, he worked as a librarian for many years at CIT. He's also a graduate of the MA from the MA in Creative Writing program at UCC. He also played hurling to a very high level and won a minor All-Ireland medal with Cork and 4 Fitzgibbon Cups with UCC. I think neither of the other writers can boast that. His former UCC teammate, double All-Ireland winner and 6-time All-Star Nicky English, described him as a boot boy from Mallow, a skinhead with a donkey jacket who adopted a very nonchalant attitude to life. Whatever It Takes is Tadhg's first crime novel, and it's a police procedural set in Cork featuring Detective Garda Tim Collins, who's an ex-All-Ireland winning captain for Cork. So you can see where he got it. And he's known to one and all as Collins. Now Collins keeps his All-Ireland medals under the bed in his mommy's house in a USA biscuit tin. Now, what I want to know is, where do you keep yours? Where do you keep your medals?
Well, until recently, Catherine, thanks for that introduction, I think. And I'll have to have some words with Nicky English the next time I meet him. I keep them, actually, I had them in the attic until recently, and we're doing renovations in our house at the moment. So they are in my office at the moment, but they are not as many as Tim Collins has, or not as important. He captained Cork to a senior All-Ireland, and that's just part of his backstory. Hurling doesn't really feature in the book very much, but I wanted an authentic Cork character, and I wanted someone who was a kind of an insider, but also an outsider. And sport makes people insiders, really, but something happens in the book then when he can't really trust his colleagues, so he's alone in that sense as well. And I wanted that kind of dichotomy really in his character. And tell us about Whatever It Takes. Tell us a little bit about the plot, or something to tease us with it. Well, it's a crime novel, as you say. It's about a detective, Garda, based in Cork City, Tim Collins, and it's not a whodunit. It's really about Collins's battle of wills with a professional criminal by the name of Molloy. And it's not a whodunit, as I say. It's really about which of them is going to go to the most extreme to win this battle of wills. That Collins is a former hurler. He doesn't like to lose. Molloy is determined to continue on with his criminality. And it's really a battle then. And other people get caught up in that. In the second half of the book, other characters come under the spell of Molloy, and they're brought into his kind of world. And then it's a race against time, really. In the second half of the book, it's more a thriller, where Collins has to do something to rescue these young people. And thanks, Tadhg. And Louise, will you tell us about After the Silence?
Sure. So it is set on a small island called Inisrún, off the coast of West Cork. And this very glamorous, wealthy family called the Kinsellas have set up what becomes a world famous artist retreat centre there. And the youngest son, Henry, marries a local woman called Keelin, and it's at Keelin's 36th birthday party that this very violent storm engulfs the island, completely shutting it off from the mainland. And the next morning, the body of a young woman is found, and no one can get on the island, no one can get off the island. So it has to have been someone here who did it. And then 10 years later, you know, the murder of the beautiful Nessa Crowley still haunts the Irish people. So a team of documentary makers have arrived to Inisrún, determined to figure out exactly what happened that night. And it takes off from there. Yeah. So it's really more about the true crime, sort of the documentary part of it. That's kind of the main driving force through the book.
Thanks, Louise. And now, Catherine, will you tell us about The Nothing Man?
Yes, and thanks for that introduction as well, Catherine. Half of it was true. The easiest way to describe The Nothing Man, I found, is to say that it's half a true crime memoir that I made up and half the killer's reaction to it as he reads. So I got the idea from my own reading of I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara, which I read a few days after they finally identified and captured the Golden State Killer. And there had been a 2-month lag between that book being a #1 New York Times bestseller and his capture. And we know from when he was active that he paid a great deal of attention to his press. So I just started thinking, like, did he read the book? And if so, how did he react? What did he feel? Was he reliving past glories? Of course, Michelle tragically passed away while she was writing that book. But if she had lived, you know, would he have been afraid? Would he have been thinking there's going to be a knock at my door? Obviously, real life could not answer any of those questions. So I made a fictitious serial killer who was operating in Cork, of course, at the turn of the millennium. And then The Nothing Man opens with Jim, who is the Nothing Man. That's not a spoiler. You find out in page 1. And he's now working in a supermarket, and he sees this book on the shelf and he picks it up. He opens it, you turn the page, and now both you and Jim are reading The Nothing Man, which was written by the lone survivor of his worst and final attack. And it goes from there.
And boy, does it. Yes, it certainly does. Tadhg, if I walked into Waterstones on Patrick Street, I could find your books on 3 or 4 different tables: sports, nonfiction, Irish literature, and now crime. What's it like navigating those different genres, and what's different about writing a crime novel?
It's, yeah, that's true, Catherine. And my next book is a memoir, so that's going to be on a different shelf again.
Like, for God's sake, you're just taking over Waterstones.
You know, I approached each book on its own kind of merits, really. The first book, the first Sunday in September, came directly out of the MA in UCC. And it started from one story, really, about a man watching his son play in an All-Ireland hurling final. And they're estranged because he gave him up for adoption as a baby. And he realizes that almost everybody there from Cork can congratulate him if Cork win, except him. And then I realized there were some other characters here. I could tell a story from the point of view of the hurler, his mother, and other characters came into my head then, and that grew from there. And that's how that book evolved, and it was published, as you said, in 2018. Ironically, I had started Whatever It Takes before that book, but I kind of put it to one side during the MA. I thought I would finish it during the MA, but that's not really what happened. My kind of plans were moved. And then I started, after the first Sunday in September, I started the memoir, which is partly about my own experience in sport. It's a book of essays, but it's partly a critique of sport as well. And I wrote that in response to the first Sunday in September, because I realized that in that book, I was hiding behind my characters, that I was bringing my ideas about sport, the negative and the positive about sport, through the characters. And I said, no, I better man up here now and write a book about myself and expose myself. So that's hopefully coming out next year. In last autumn, then I finished Whatever It Takes, and Marcia agreed to publish it. So I was working on that, and I got a phone call then in November from a publisher in Dublin, a man called Liam Hayes, who wanted me to write this book with Dennis Collin, who's a famous Cork hurler in the 1970s. And the timing was bad, really. I was busy with the last edits of the crime novel, and but eventually I agreed, and I sat down with Dennis. He's a lovely man. He's 75 now, and we talked about his life story. We recorded it in December and January, so that became my lockdown book. Now that was very different because, you know, as novelists, we want to create characters, situations, voices. But this was a voice and a character that was already fully formed. So I had to have a different approach on that. And I had to try and be as true as I could to his voice, while still, you know, structuring the book in an interesting way and getting all the sentences and everything right. So that really was different. And the memoir is a bit different too, because it's essays. And I'm taking, you know, negative and positive aspects of sport and interweaving it with my own life. So there are differences for sure.
And the Whatever It Takes is part of a trilogy.
It is. It's a series.
Trilogy.
Yeah, it's the middle book of a trilogy. Actually, I'm going to I've just begun this sequel, which will kind of develop other aspects of Colin's characters. It's not going to be a gangland book. It'll be a kind of a lone murder. And, you know, he is going to have a new partner in his job, a woman partner, a detective who's going to challenge him. He has a new partner in his private life, a woman who's going to challenge him. She's from Northern Ireland and she has 2 daughters who are going to put manners on him. So, and then I'm going to write a prequel, you know, about the build up to the previous case where Collins has to deal with a serial killer based in Cork City.
Okay, sounds familiar. Then Louise, like Tadhg, you're also on several different tables in Waterstones and Patrick Street, and now you're on the crime table. Was that a deliberate move on your part? And if it was, did your approach to writing change, or did the book just come out like that?
I mean, I'm sort of like, I'm kind of a marketing nightmare because I just can't seem to decide what genre I want to write in. And I think, you know, I've written, like my first novel was dystopian, and then my the 2 in between were contemporary. One was YA, one was adult. I wrote a fantasy retelling of The Little Mermaid, and then obviously this was a psychological thriller. So I think I'm less kind of constrained by the idea of genre and more just led by the story. And I think that with After the Silence, you know, that, which I've spoken about before, that I have been listening to the West Cork podcast about the Sophie Toscan de Plantier murder. And obviously, you know, having grown up in West Cork, I was 11 when she died. And, you know, it really, I suppose, stayed with me. I think a lot of people in the area would say that it cast a very long shadow. And it's, you know, it was a really traumatic event, I think. So when I was listening to the podcast, I think I realized that I had this very like childlike desire that they would have solved it, you know, that they would have solved the crime, and that Sophie's family would have peace, and you know, I suppose the people of West Cork would have peace as well, and obviously, you know, fiction you know, that real life isn't tied up as neatly as fiction is, and I think afterwards I couldn't stop thinking just about it, and sort of the idea of like the dreaded Sassenach, and you know, the Englishman coming into a very, you know, close, tightly knit community. And then, of course, just this idea of these documentary makers coming in afterwards and asking all of these questions, and you know, with their English accents, and I suppose trying to uncover secrets that some people just don't want to be uncovered. And the idea for After the Silence kind of came out of that. So I think very early on when I had that, I was like, well, the only way that really is going to make sense to tell the story about an unsolved murder, about secrets, about lies, you know, I think it just became very clear. I was like, oh, this is going to be a psychological thriller. And that did, you know, I was a bit nervous going in. And I think partly because actually, like, the Irish women, you know, I will include you, Catherine, and no offense, Tadhg, but, you know, just being an Irish woman myself. But I suppose, you know, I felt like, God, the Irish women who are writing in this genre are just really, like, it's really, really strong. So I think it was just making sure that if I was going to try and do this, that I would do it to the best of my ability. And obviously, you know, there's things that are really important in this genre, you know, like pacing and like the way that you sort of have to drip feed information and things like that. But I mean, I actually really enjoyed it. I think that out of all of the books that I've written, it just felt like a really good fit for me when I was writing. Yeah, so I feel very thrilled to be here and sort of to be part of this Irish crime, and particularly Cork crime.
Brilliant. And Louise, is your next book going to be about crime genre, or will it be something else?
I see, and it's so typical because the idea came to me, the one that I'm working on at the moment, and it's not crime. So I sort of feel like I have to. The way I've gone with my career so far is that I've always just sort of trusted my instincts and said, okay, this is the story I want to tell right now, but I really want to come back to it. And my parents really want me to do as well because they love crime, and I think they're a bit like, oh great, a book that we can actually enjoy.
Yeah, and Catherine Ryan Howard, you're a one table in Waterstones woman. You're always going to be on the crime table.
Always.
So what's so great about crime fiction that it holds all your attention? Because you're obviously a very talented writer.
Thank you. For me, really, there's just I know myself, I will never write anything else. Like, this is what I want to write. The best writing advice I ever got was write the book you want to read but can't find on the shelf. And I read quite widely, but like my first love and the literary love of my life is crime and thrillers and true crime to a lesser extent. And back when I was like obsessed with getting published and prioritizing that over actually, you know, writing a book that I wanted to, I did try and write in other genres, and I was absolutely terrible at it because I feel like crime fiction is what I know and what I'm familiar with. And when I set out to write a book, like, I don't know if I ever achieve it, but what I'm always trying to do is write something that absolutely fits within the crime genre, but is something new and different and isn't like anything I've read before, because that's what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And we're absolutely spoiled as crime fiction fans. Like, as you know, there is no shortage of crime novels, especially in the last few years. But I find it like increasingly difficult to find thrillers that, like, I love them and then I enjoy them, but a week later I won't remember anything about them. I'm always looking for a book that like just is something. I just recently read, I know he's not from Cork, but Will Dean has a book coming out in January called The Last Thing to Burn, which is one of the best crime novels I've ever read. I'm always looking for that, something totally different. And I just feel that crime is the only genre in which I have enough knowledge of it to actually do that. And it's just my first love. Like, when I started writing Distress Signals, my first novel, it was like there was an audible click, and like everything else I'd been trying to write up until that point just faded away. And I was like, oh, you don't have to struggle to come up with 3,000 words of a chapter. Like, I was like, how am I going to get everything to fit into these 3,000 words? Because I was just so like, this is it. Like, it's absolutely, I am killing people for a living forever.
Excellent. And who are you killing next? Or do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I mean, I do, but I also don't, because it's, well, basically I am writing a novel set in lockdown. Yes, I am. And I will be the sacrificial lamb on the altar of lockdown books. But basically I was writing a different book back in March. I was only a little ways through it, and it was about the fallout in the media after a shooting in a nightclub. And once the fans got turned on in the factory, I couldn't write it anymore. I was so stuck because it was like science fiction. It was like nothing that was happening in real life. And I was locked down alone in Dublin city centre, and seeing the city in a way I never had before, and you know, felt kind of like it was a privilege in some ways. It was also weird and terrifying, but it was a privilege. And then I heard the Deputy Health Minister in the UK tell new couples that they could either break up and wait until lockdown was over, or they could move in together to get around the household rule, and that just set something off. So it's kind of the perfect situation for a crime. Because you have a new couple, everyone lies to everyone at the beginning of a relationship, but in this situation there's no one to contradict anything they're saying. There's no friends, there's no family, there's no colleagues, so they can tell each other whatever they like and hide whatever they like, and they're locked away in an apartment for a few weeks. So that is what I'm working.
So that'll be taking up all your attention, Catherine, will it? Well,
I'm nearly at the end of the second draft with that. There's also something, I should have a super injunction for myself. There is something very exciting happening that I can't tell anyone about. And I shouldn't even be saying I shouldn't even be saying that there's an exciting thing happening that I'm not allowed to say anything about. I'll be shot. But yeah, it was a very exciting summer. And if all that works out and comes to fruition, that will be happening as well. But I can't say anything about it.
I wish you'd tell us, but anyway, okay, look, Tadhg, going back to what you were talking about earlier, you were about whatever it takes. The first half of the novel is a slow burn, where you're building the characters and laying the groundwork, and then the second half, at the start of the second half, there's a kidnapping, and it turns into Line of Duty, and Collins is barking instructions and ordering simultaneous raids all over Cork City. I think there's 9 simultaneous Garda raids all over the city, and it's serious, serious operational stuff and all the rest of it. And it all feels really authentic because you've got the kind of banter going on between the cops, and they're worrying about things like press releases, and it feels quite real. But I know, and we all know now, that you're a librarian, Tadhg. So like, how did you manage this like helter-skelter authentic feel? You know, was it, anyway, you tell us.
Well, I got some help from a guard, basically, and you'd be surprised what librarians have to do, Catherine. We don't sit around with books all day, you know. But, so no, I did get advice on that, but I also went with my own instincts. Somebody said to me some years ago that I should make Collins an inspector, a more senior officer, a superintendent, but that's not really his personality. And when I spoke to my friend who's a guard, he said, yeah, he said, an inspector wouldn't do this and an inspector wouldn't do that. I have to be careful what I say now in case any inspectors are looking on. So I still wanted him at the detective level because he is, to a certain extent, a loner, but he's very much part of a team as well. You know, the Gardaí are a big team, and Anglesey Street Garda Station is a very big team. Now I had to simplify the kind of situation there a little bit, so I only had one superintendent, one chief superintendent. Was a lot more based in that Garda station, and I had to reduce the number of people involved as well, not to have too many characters for the reader. But the pacing was something I worked very hard at, and Louise mentioned that as well in her book, because, you know, I think readers really want tension. They want suspense. They want to know something is going to happen, and they want to feel that tension. But you can't keep that up for 350 pages. You have to have some drama then, and then there's a release, and then it can build up again. So I worked at that, but you're right, there is a different pacing. And especially I worked at the voice, because initially when I wrote it, in the very first version, it was in the first person. And it was a kind of a down these, you know, mean streets, a lonely man must go. And I realized pretty quickly I wanted other voices in there. I wanted the voices of the criminals, and I wanted the voices of the victims, you know, and their families as well. So I tried to broaden that out. And the experience of two people who become victims of crime take over in a little bit in the second part. But at the same time, Collins is trying to rescue them, to find them as well. So there's two things going on really. There's different voices in there.
Well, it really works anyway. And Louise, if I could come to you, I was really struck by the opening to the novel, which is kind of like sort of, well, I was thinking of it kind of as a Greek chorus, but it's also like the voice of the island, and it returns several times during the book. And so there's this kind of almost mythical, mysterious sort of other voice kind of overseeing the whole thing. And I just found that really interesting, wondering, where did the island voice come from? And was it always there, or did it come later in the creative process? It returns about 5 or 6 times, I think. And I always really liked when it came back. I was kind of intrigued by it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because sometimes when you're putting it in, you're like, oh, this is either going to work or it's going to be really annoying. So I'm glad to hear that you liked it. It actually wasn't there in the first draft. I think what happened was I had written it, and then I was just thinking about, I suppose, you know, there's this kind of mythology around these 3 sisters who are living on the island. You know, Nessa is the girl who was murdered, but her 2 sisters, and it's the Crowley girls, you know. And I think when I started to think, you know, around like these 3 beautiful blonde sisters that the entire island is sort of obsessed with, I kept coming back to the virgin suicides, which was something, I think I read it when I was maybe 14 or 15, and you know, there's a handful of books I think that I remember when I put it down feeling really stunned after it and sort of feeling almost like speechless, and that was one of them. So I think that always really stuck with me, and I just loved that sort of that choral voice that book is told through. But I wasn't sure if I could quite pull that off for an entire book. But I really liked the idea, I suppose, a bit like, you know, Sex and the City, when they always say New York is the 5th character.
Yes.
Yeah, I kind of felt like with After the Silence, the island itself is almost like, you know, a character in itself. So I just like the idea, I suppose, of having the voice of the islanders, the voice of the island itself, and that being told in this kind of like, just as you said, that sort of choral voice.
Yeah. Yeah, I really liked it. And Catherine, like all good crime fiction, The Nothing Man holds a mirror up to society. It examines our fascination with serial killers and with murderers. How we can all list off the names of the murderers, but very few of us can remember the names of the victim. And in fact, you play with one of your own books as well, because you include the Canal Killer from your Edgar-nominated The Liar's Girl as one of the murderers that everybody knows the name of. So you have important things to say, but you never allow them to get in the way of the plot. How do you strike that balance?
I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. So just moving right along.
No, I suppose that it's not something that I ever think about when I sit down to write. And in the previous books, there wasn't really, I suppose you could argue that Rewind is kind of about the dangers of social media, and so like you could find sort of an issue or a central theme in there. But The Nothing Man was different because I was trying to write a complete true crime memoir, which is very different to the kind of pulpy, sensationalized true crime title. Mm-hmm. Like the memoir is usually by someone who's directly involved. And I really wanted to examine like this mythical status that we give serial killers. It's not true. Like I read The Stranger Beside Me, which is the some would say seminal Ted Bundy book written by a woman who knew him back when I was way too young to be reading books about people like Ted Bundy. Details of it have never left me. In the last year or so, we've had an Amazon documentary and we've had a reissue of a memoir by the woman he was with at the time, Elizabeth Kendall. And it just totally contradicted everything I thought I knew about Ted Bundy. We always hear that he was like charming and suave and highly intelligent and, could charm anyone and had cure women at the door and all this. It's all total rubbish. The reality is very, very different. And so I'm sort of, I shouldn't say this, I'm allergic to research, Catherine. We've had this conversation.
Yes, she's allergic to research.
I'm allergic to research. I do as little of it as possible, but I did take a dive into the symposium that the FBI had back in 2008. And the idea was to meet with law enforcement, obviously in North America or in the United States, and to dissuade them of their myths and misconceptions about serial killers, which they had got, like the rest of us, from Netflix and crime novels and Hollywood and so forth. So I wanted to work that into the memoir, because the whole idea of the Nothing Man, it's right there in the title. He is nothing. He is a bunch of nothing. The only notable thing he has ever done is kill people. And I just wanted to really explore that idea, because that was my way into, I want to write about serial killers and I want to experiment with the form, but I want to do something new. And I just don't see, because it's not particularly dramatic, I suppose, the idea that actually serial killers are just losers. And it was kind of sparked by something that Patton Oswalt, who was Michelle McNamara's widower, said in a podcast. He was quoting her and he said, these guys, they go to prison and they get fat, not to fat shame, but like that's what he was saying. Like they don't do anything. They're not Hannibal Lecter. They're not in a prison cell, like, controlling events outside the prison and having psychic abilities. They're just ordinary losers of men, essentially. I hope no serial killers are watching and coming to find me after that. But that's just where it came from. I just wanted to get that across. And it's funny because there's been a couple of reviews on the dreaded Amazon, etc., which is like, she's wrong. Like serial killers are super intelligent and they are this, that, and the other thing. I'm like, no, they're not. I'm doing my bit. I'm chipping away.
And Tadhg, you cover a lot about the drugs problem, and Louise, of course, you deal with coercive control, and there's the recent first conviction for coercive control. I have a question about that. Yes. Could you tell us how you approach the coercive control storyline, Louise?
Yeah,
which is also, by the way, in The Nothing Man, there is Jim's relationship with his wife. There's a little bit of it by coincidence, but you take a deep dive into it, Louise.
Yeah, I suppose I mean, as I said, the idea for the true crime documentary, that was what had come to me first. And then I think I was, doing a lot of reading around cases like, unsolved murders. And I was actually really struck by how often when the prime suspect or the murderer was a straight man, how often people would say things like, oh, why does his wife or his partner, why do they stay? And, and I found it really eerie that I suppose that sort of very uncanny parallel around the language that we use concerning victims of domestic abuse, like, why don't they just leave? So I think that when I started to see the two of those, and it just to me felt really appropriate, and I knew it was going to be set in an island in like this very isolated setting, and so much around coercive control as well is trying to isolate the victim, trying to make them as dependent on the abuser as much as possible. So like I did do, you're gonna hate this now, Catherine, I'm sorry, I'm very impressed that you don't have to do any research. Like I'm obviously not as you must have a much better imagination, because I kind of was like, no, I did do an enormous amount of reading, and also I had worked with the West Cork Women Against Violence project quite a lot, actually. I suppose just because of asking for it, which dealt with sexual violence, I suppose I have been doing sort of a lot of work in that sector, in sort of gendered violence against women. So they were incredibly helpful. Like I can't overstate just how amazing they were. Like all the women who actually worked there, they spoke to me. They gave me like advice of of books to read and literature to read. And then they set up sort of just meetings with, I would say, like almost like a dozen women who had experienced both physical and emotional abuse. And like, I really can't say enough about how grateful I am to those women, because they were really reliving some incredibly traumatic moments in their lives. And I suppose to be so generous as to share that with me, like I'm just writing a novel, like I'm literally just telling a story, and I think to be that generous with their time and also with their emotional energy, I think just to kind of really go there with me. And it's funny because I've said like that I really enjoyed the process of writing the book, and I did, but the research was really difficult. I would come away from these meetings and just feel really, I can't even really put it into words, because I think sometimes we live our lives, I've never been impacted by this. I didn't grow up in a house where there was abuse. I've never been in an abusive relationship. And I think sometimes it's easier, or it's more comfortable to sort of live your life with those kind of blinkers on. And then I think to really be exposed to the darkness and what some women experience on a daily basis, just this relentless abuse and manipulation and control. It was really overwhelming, but still like a complete honor, I think, to be able to sort of bear witness to that, and to just feel, I felt really humbled by the fact that they would share that with me, and I really tried to use it in like a very responsible way. And that even though I kept saying to them, I was like, this isn't like asking for it, this is going to be a psychological thriller, but that I suppose I still wanted to use this form as a way of dealing with that issue. And I think actually like some of the best writers in this genre, as you said earlier, are using crime or are using psychological thrillers as a way of exploring these really important issues. And a friend, so I'll just finish on this now, I'm rambling, but a friend of mine who reads a lot of thrillers said to me, she was like, the best authors, she said the bad authors, she said, use women and women's bodies and violence against women as a trope or as a sort of a narrative device. And she said what the good writers is actually they take women's fear of just existing in the world, and they try and explore that. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to try and sort of do the latter.
Yeah, exactly. And Tadhg, in your book, it's more of well, it's a police procedural, and you what you have is this kind of conflict rather than a whodunit. And I'm just wondering, it's sort of like, it's a classic crime novel setup, like say between John Rebus and Big Ger Cafferty in the Ian Rankin books. Or like I was thinking of Al Pacino and Robert De Niro in Michael Mann's Heat. So it's that kind of, you know, thing. And what I'm just wondering why you were attracted to that kind of a thing rather than a whodunit, as we say.
Yeah, well, I think there is a sense of whodunit or what's going to happen next. You know, we want resolution eventually at the end of crime novels. We usually get some kind of resolution, so we're looking for that. But in the meantime, there's tension, there's suspense. There are, you know, Collins is acting against Molloy, Molloy is acting in return, and so on. And we want to know what's happening next. And one of the reasons I wanted it in the third person with different voices is that we can see from the point of view of the criminal, we know what he's going to do. We look at Collins, he doesn't know what's going to happen to him. So that raises the tension then in those scenes. And what's behind the tension really is something that Louise spoke about. It's violence, really. You know, you have two sets of violence. You have the criminal violence, obviously, and their whole world is based around that, drug dealing and everything, coercion, you know, prostitution, all that is based on violence. And then you have state kind of sponsored violence in a way, you know, that we have a legal system and backing it up and everything, and you're a lawyer, where if you commit a crime, you know, police can come to your house and bring you to prison. So, you know, that is at the center of it really. But I think the main thing is the characters. If the characters are interesting, or if they have something to say, or you can engage with them and the voices have something to say, I think that's what propels it. And the sense of place as well. And I did want to set it in Cork City, on the streets of the city, using a lot of real locations with authentic Cork voices. Because when I started the book 5 years ago, there wasn't a book really that I felt was authentically set, a criminal book, crime book set in Cork. So that's what I was trying to achieve. And it was, again, the kind of book I would have liked to have read, you know, when I was reading crime all those years.
Yes, and Catherine, you said to me before, I'm an Irish writer, but I'm not Irish writing. Does that literary snobbishness annoy you, or the people who say that if a crime novel is good, it transcends the genre?
It does annoy me. That was a great quote. I didn't realize I had said that. How
you said it. That's why I remembered it.
Transcends the genre is my absolute pet peeve. I cannot abide by it. And Tana French is someone who, I'm sure she doesn't mind, but like the New York Times and Washington Post always say that about her, that her book is so good it transcends the genre. That just drives me demented, because why can't a crime novel like be on, like all the things we've been talking about, like, you know, the reflection of society, you know, as Louise said about, you know, violence in women, and, you know, taking these things and putting them front and center in our novels. Also, we don't have to do, now I hope there's no serial killers watching, and now I hope there's no literary fiction writers watching, but I'm just going to go for it. We don't have to do the decade of, you know, navel gazing that often goes into literary fiction. Like, we're not going to have a literary, now, I mean, I obviously love literary fiction as much as the next person, and I read a lot of it, but it's going to be 10, 15, 20 years before we have the definitive lockdown novel. Whereas, you know, I'm on a book a year, I can put it into mine now, because I'm not coming at it from the point of view of perspective. I'm not coming at it from the point of view of how does this teach us how to live, how to be. It's just the setting in my novel. And I think that's a huge advantage that crime writers have. So, you know, I do get annoyed a little bit, sometimes a lot, when it's Irish writing, you know, capital W. I'm very much Irish writing, lowercase w. But I feel like everyone gets a different bit of the pie. And I'm a full-time writer. Like, I get to do my dream job. And I think if I was writing literary fiction, you know, there's very few writers in that genre who can say that, just because of the nature of the market. I mean, we are all in the right business, lads, because in 2018, crime fiction overtook sales of all other fiction for the first time. And so, yes, I get annoyed. I also, honestly, what really annoys me is that a lot of the time people who say bad things about crime fiction are not in any way familiar with it. They haven't read it, and they think crime is back in the 90s when it was like really gruesome. The main female character had rigor mortis by the end of page 1. You know, hugely gratuitous violence and stuff like that. That is not where crime fiction is now. And anyone who says that it is only revealing their own lack of knowledge about the genre.
So
Rant ends.
Who should they be reading? Who do you love reading?
All of us.
Yes, apart from all of us, right? Who are your favorite crime writers? And I'll be asking all of you this, lads. So you can be thinking about, as you're it now at the moment.
Yeah, and I don't have time to think about it. Obviously, as Louise referred to earlier, there is a huge stable. Sorry, Tadhg, but you can be an honorary female crime writer for tonight. There is a huge stable of Irish female crime writers who are, no pun intended, killing it at the moment. So I would read all them. But like some books I've read over the last few months that have just, I think Louise used the word stunned earlier. You know, they've stunned me. True Story by Kate Reid Petty. Nothing Can Harm You, I think it's by Nicola May Goldberg. These are not your standard crime novels, but they are about crimes. You know, they wouldn't work without the crime at the center of them. They play with form. They are beautifully written. They're experiments in fiction, and you know, novel means new. And I just love when I find a novel that is actually doing something new. So I would recommend those 2 novels. Also, Michael Connelly is my god amongst men. So
he is a god.
Too.
He is a god. Tadhg, who are your favorite crime writers?
Well, everyone that Catherine mentioned there, and you know, Michael Connelly, John Connelly as well, all the great Irish women writers at the moment. I love Kate Atkinson. I love her Jackson Brodie series.
Yeah, she's brilliant.
It's a very light touch, you know, which I really enjoy. I love the French writer Fred Vargas. She's great because, again, her character is very different. He's interesting. And I love Montalban, or the Camilleri books as well. And I think I read a lot of those this summer because it meant I could go to France and to go to Italy as well. I'm reading a great book at the moment from another Cork writer, Michelle Dunn. It's a great book. It's called While Nobody Is Watching. And it's very interesting because Michelle is a former soldier. She saw combat in the Lebanon, and her main character is a former soldier, a woman as well, who's recovering from PTSD. So it's really interesting. But I don't like the term genre even, you know, because there's good writing or bad writing. That's all there is really. So I could be reading a book of essays. I love Terry Pratchett, you know, which is classified as fantasy, but he just makes me laugh. So I read him all the time as well. So yeah, reading a lot. Thankfully, we need to read these days.
Oh, we absolutely do. And Louise, who are your favorite crime writers?
Oh, there's so many. You know, it's funny. Catherine, I loved what you said there. And like for years, I actually didn't read a lot of psychological thrillers, but it was only because I'm such a scaredy cat that like I wouldn't be able to sleep. So like my parents wouldn't let me. It got to a point where I saw The Ring when I was 17 and I had to sleep on the floor of their bed. So they were like, "Do not."
In fairness, Louise, I'm still not over the trauma of seeing The Ring.
Yes,
so you know, I understand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate this. But my boyfriend is really into music, and we were driving somewhere, and Justin Bieber came on, and I said, "I can't believe you listen to Justin Bieber." And he said, "People who don't know that much about music are the people who are snobbiest about it." And it really struck me there when you said, you know, if someone's like, "Oh, I don't read this genre," I think it's actually an indication of kind of a bad reader, because I think if you're a good reader, you're sort of open to, if you're like, if the book is good, I want to read it.
Yeah.
So I think the authors that I love Erin Kelly, I love Megan Abbott, I love Tana French, Liz Nugent, Jane Casey. I'm trying to think of who else has just been, there's just
there's a good
amazing women.
Good cross section there. Anyway, I'm just wondering, should we make, I have loads, I mean, I have like 1,000 other questions that I'd love to be asking you, but I'm just wondering, one of the questions here is, who's each of your favorite crime novels? So we've all that. Okay, yeah. So then we have a question here from Mairead Hearn. We all know Mairead Hearn, Swirl and Thread. She has asked, she says, Cork is a strong character in all of your books. How important is it to you as writers to put Cork on the literary map? That's a really good question. So who wants to go first? You jump in, Tadhg.
Well, there's old cliche, right, about what you know about, but I think also Annie Dillard said, write about what astonishes you, and Cork always astonishes me. You know, you overhear people, what they're saying in the English market or on North Main Street or Shandon Street or somewhere, and they always astonish me, the character, the personality, and it's a great city. So, you know, it was obvious for me that I would set all my books more or less there, you know, so I've no problem doing that. And there are so many great Cork writers, and Tiggy Kevin Doyle as well, who's a crime writer based in Cork as well. So yeah, it makes sense to me. And
same question to you, Catherine. Was it really important to you to put Cork on the literary map?
It was important because it means I don't have to do as much research because I know the place. So that was reason number one. But coming back to something Tadhg said, you know, about looking for crime novels set in Cork. When I was growing up and I was discovering, like one of the first Irish crime novels, she may argue it's not that, but I think it's a crime. It's certainly a psychological thriller, Sins of Omission by Gemma O'Connor. I have never forgot the moment when I got to the twist in that book. It's truly shocking. I know now we always say with the twist you won't see coming, but like that really was an amazing twist. And Paul Carson's medical thrillers, when I found them and they were set in Ireland, I just like couldn't believe it, because I had been on a diet of exclusively American and British crime. And then to find like I believed them, they were so believable, even though they had the Gardaí in them and stuff, but there wasn't the same thing in Cork. And I really, you know, we all get a kick out of writing something or reading something, in a place we're familiar with, set in a place we're familiar with. Clearly I need a coffee because my stumbling over my words at this stage. But, you know, that's my motivation mainly, the hardly any research, and also that's what I wanted to read growing up. And I hope there's some aspiring future crime writer out there who now has crime fiction, you know, a plethora of it to choose from, that wasn't there when I was growing up and looking for the same thing.
And Louise, you're kind of Cape Clear, I think.
Oh, well, I shouldn't really say. Again, it's probably like what I said about the lack of imagination. I mean, I remember when I was writing, asking for it, and I just thought, you know, because you have so much time to write your first novel, and then the second one, they're like, well, we would like a first draft in 8 months, and I was like, and I said, do you know what? I'll just set it in like a small town in West Cork, and it's basically Clonakilty, but I won't, you know, it's like the complete, like the layout of it and everything is, because I said it's just easy. I won't have to make up anything else. So Catherine, maybe I am, you know, I'm coming with you now on the no research.
It's so much easier. So because you know what? Writing a book is hard enough without
exactly.
Although the Harmons might be nice now, you know.
Research true.
I'm definitely an armchair traveler with crime novels. I love going to different places. I do love Michael Connelly's LA, for example. But in relation to when you do when you have set your books in kind of local locations, were there any surprise reactions from people? Because I know with my book that somebody said to me, that's the wrong, she shouldn't have gone across the bridge there, and you know, anyway. But so did you get any reactions like that, lads?
I remember one person, it's so funny, there's like a GA match and there's someone there who's wearing like socks with sandals, and like a friend of mine was like, was that my dad? And I was like, no, it wasn't. I don't know that your dad wears socks and sandals, but you know, so there was a few things like that, but nothing. I actually think most people are very understanding of, you know, this is fiction.
That it's fiction.
People are fictional, like it's not, you know.
And did you
years ago? Sorry, Catherine. Years ago, I was at Harrogate, which is a major crime festival that our livers are delighted we didn't go to this year because it's quite the session usually. But Mark Billingham was on stage. And someone said, you know, I have more of a comment than a question as per usual. there's no like, it's, you know, there's no exit 21 off the whatever motorway. I've all the details as per usual. And he said, yes, there is. It says so right there on page 75. So I always take, I love it. I trot it out all the time. You know, it's made up. There was someone who made a comment to me that I mention in one of my books, an Irish pub in Breda, which is a city in the south of the Netherlands that I used to live in. And I gave it a different name to the actual Irish pub that's there. And someone was like, she got that wrong. Like, no, I didn't. I made it up.
And Tadhg, what about you? Any surprise reactions or people giving out to you about your locations?
Well, a few people did say to me, because I have real pubs and then fictional cafes and so on, they said, is that so-and-so, or is that such and such a place? And again, we make stuff up, you know, it's what we do. So sometimes we know an answer, it is or it isn't, but it's better not to say really and keep the suspense there as well. But one person said to me, which I thought was a very nice thing, they said they read the book in a Cork accent, which I thought was a compliment.
Okay, so that's really good. I don't know what I'm doing here because I can't see any more of the questions. There's something wrong there, but so we'll just have to chat away among ourselves again.
If you press the Q&A there, I've got the questions up here. Do you see where the Q&A is at the bottom?
Yeah, I'll just try it again there. Oh, somebody has asked, Catherine, why the move to Dublin? Is Cork still home? And this is Laura Power.
I moved to Dublin because in 2014 I entered Trinity as a mature student, so I had to be here, and then I didn't go back. Of course Cork is home, but like that's where my parents are, and my brother, my sister, and the dog, they're all there. And hopefully, depending on the government, I will be going back there for Christmas, but I can't see myself leaving Dublin. Like, I really do like it here. I'm sorry.
And somebody has asked here, Laura Power again, has asked, Tadhg, did you learn anything new that helped you during the UCC Creative Writing MA?
Well, I did. I mean, you can't really be taught how to write. I think you have to learn it, but you can be treated as a writer. And I was in a community of writers, which was a big thing for me. And I was being treated as a writer, and I was sharing my material, which is a big step for a writer. You know, you can write a lot, but until you share it with other people and put yourself out there. So I learned a lot from that, not learning how to write as such, but it was a good year for me. I was just retiring from my job at the time. So I treated it as a job the whole year, and you know, you're put under pressure, you have to work hard, you have deadlines, and also there are different types of writing, which probably helped me when I did write a memoir and when I write in other forms as well, essays and so on. So it did help. I would recommend it. If you think it's right for you, I would definitely recommend it. Or do workshops. Do the workshops in the West Cork Literary Festival. Catherine is doing a workshop very soon. So sign up.
I owe you a pint because I totally forgot to say that earlier. 7th of December, 5 nights, bookings open now.
And it's a fully online workshop with you, and it's evenings as well, isn't it?
Yes, I'll be sitting right there at my desk. I think it's like 7 to 9 each night for 5 nights, and it's a version. I did the exact same thing in Bantry. I think it was last year, but who can tell anymore when things were. But the idea is that at the end of the 5 nights, you have some sort of marketable idea. You have a synopsis. I very much focus on plotting. That's my favorite subject. So it'll be a lot to do with that, with story architecture.
Okay, so it's a really great opportunity for anyone who wouldn't have been able to get to Bantry, and they can now do it online in the comfort of their own home, or the discomfort, depending on the... And there's one final question I'll ask you, Louise. What is your writing routine daily? And this is from anonymous attendee. So...
Yeah, I mean, I often think when people ask this question, you know, that maybe they're aspiring writers themselves, and I suppose that, you know, I always want to clarify that just because this is the way that I work doesn't really mean that it's like the only way that you can write. I think the most important thing about writing is that you figure out when you're at your most creative, or how you can be your most efficient or productive, and everybody is different with that. But for me, I like to get up really early, take the dog for a walk, and then just get to my desk. And you know, I will try and write for maybe 4 or 5 hours, but I find like I can edit for very long periods of time, but with writing, like creativity, there's only a certain amount of time I think that I can really give that my all. And then after that, you know, I'm reading, or I'm trying to work out a few problems in the text itself. But yeah, I'm a morning person. But you know, I have another friend who starts writing at like midnight and writes till 6 o'clock in the morning. So I know I could not do that, but like, you know, everyone's different.
No, yeah, it's you have to find just your own way, I suppose. Would you agree with that, Catherine and Tadhg?
Yeah, and I think like 4 to 5 hours is about the magic time. Like I don't think there's anyone who can go longer than that. Your brain just starts to turn to mush. Anytime I'm asked, you know, what's your typical writing day, I always say like I'm still trying to establish one. I am a terrible procrastinator, and I like to have my rewards before I do the work. So if there's something, it works really well, and miss every deadline. If there's, you know, something on Netflix, my brain will say you're better off watching it now, or you'll just be distracted by it. So I'm still trying to establish it, but it's mainly about coffee and panic.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm like Louise. I'm a morning person as well, and tea. You know, I have to have tea. You can't write without tea or coffee, whatever it is. But yeah, I'm a morning person as well, and there's only so much you can do. But I'm at my best in the morning, because I was working all my life, going to work in the morning. So yeah, I do the same in my writing. And
there is, I know I said it was a final question. Emer will probably be going ape now, but it is an important question, and it's from Emma Farrell. Do you plot the entire story before writing the first draft? And she also says, great chat, thanks all. So, I mean, that is an important question. So I think we should, would you, maybe Catherine, would you like to take that one?
I do. I'm absolutely obsessed with plotting. That is directly related to the fact that if you are plotting, you are not writing yet. So it's a great procrastination exercise. I started off at the beginning with Post-its, and there'd be different colored Post-its, and there'd be a whole thing on the wall. I'd be like Carrie in Homeland when she has her wall of whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. But now I do it on an Excel spreadsheet, which is also color coded to within an inch of its life. I plot everything out because, to me, like that gives me the confidence then to write the book. Like everyone is different, and the only right way is the way that works best for you. But I feel like the plotting is building the house, and then I get to go in and do the fun bit, like interior design, which is actually write the book. But of course things change along the way, and a mistake I made for a long time before I got an agent and was published was that I thought like the plotting, I couldn't start writing the book until I had the plot perfect. And what I didn't realize, and I think what you don't realize until you actually start writing, is that the best ideas come during the process. And that's when you're actually writing the words of the book, is when everything really starts to fit into place. So I do plot in advance, but it's never exactly as that then by the time I get to the end of the book.
And would you agree with that, Louise?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you, Catherine. And I think, with all of my books, they've all been slightly different. Let's say with a book like Asking for It or Almost Love, there was certain timelines, so I wanted to have that quite well structured. But I will say that with After the Silence, my editor was going on maternity leave, and she asked me to write a really extensive outline before she went. And it was the first time I'd ever done that. And After the Silence was the quickest book I've ever written. So I do think actually, and I agree with you, Catherine, that things changed, and I added in different layers, and there was different, the documentary devices kind of was something I did on the second draft. But I thought it was really interesting that by having that outline, that there was just kind of like a confidence and a speed or something, I don't know. But I also think, as I said earlier, every writer is different, and you just kind of have to figure out what best suits you and what makes you, I think, your most creative, or where you feel most inspired.
And Tadhg, what about you on that question? And I think we really, sorry, go ahead.
Very briefly, probably less so in terms of plotting, but I do think it's a big help when you have a narrative arc, when you know where you're getting to somewhere. If you know where Roddy Doyle once said that The Snapper was the easiest book to write for him because you knew where it was going to end when the baby was born.
Yes.
So for crime writers, there's usually something else at the end, but I think it does help a lot when you have an idea in your head where you're heading to.
And Mairead Hearn has asked, how do you feel about all the virtual festivals? Do you think there's a place for them going forward? Quick answer.
I just think it's fabulous that people who could not physically attend when we were doing this in real life can now do so. I think and I think going forward, it'll be this and in person. I can't see this going away because it is so beneficial to so many people.
And Louise?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I have makeup on, but I'm also wearing my slippers. So really, this is like the ideal situation for me. So I do think, you know, I mean, obviously, we've talked about technology issues, and I think there's always that fear, like, please let everything work out okay, and, you know, let this be all right. But then afterwards, it's really nice just to close down the laptop and be in my own house. So that does make, I'm quite introverted, so I think that makes a huge difference for me anyway.
Yeah, and Tadhg?
Yeah, I think it's great because otherwise what else would we have? Like, it's a way of connecting. It's not the same, and we all love going to Bantry every year and to all the other events, and we're missing those.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be kind to each other as well and kind to ourselves, but it's great to see you all, and it's great to think that there's 57 people looking on. You know, it's a buzz. It's great.
Well, I think we've now gone 10 minutes over as far as I can see. So I suppose, I mean, we could keep chatting all night, but I think Emer is now back. And so hang on a second, I'll just close down the questions there. Yes, Emer, you're back. Hello.
I am indeed. So yeah, just to thank you all. That was absolutely amazing. I'm very glad I had myself muted because I laughed out loud several times during the event. That was absolutely brilliant. I loved seeing and hearing all of you. And I just wanted to thank our audience for being here as well. A couple of people mentioned in the comments, I think Noelle mentioned something about going to Mam Murphy's. Obviously, I would love to be heading down the street.
Having one of the giant gins with the wedge of grapefruit in it.
Catherine, didn't we have giant gins in Bantry last year? I think the two of us were sitting on the wall by the water.
In your takeaway coffee cups.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So hopefully that will be happening next year. But this has been a very fine alternative. And I think we'll all be back in our pajamas in about 2 minutes time. I'm already half in them. And I'm going to go in and pour myself a large glass of wine now, and I recommend that you all do the same.
Yes.
So I just want to thank our panelists, Catherine Kerwin, for doing such an incredible comparing job, Tadhg Coakley, Catherine Ryan Howard, and Louise O'Neill. You were all absolutely amazing. Anybody who hasn't read your books should rush out and do so immediately. You know, brilliant Christmas presents, brilliant lockdown reading. And I just want to mention as well that we have other events coming up, as Catherine Ryan Howard mentioned. She's teaching a crime writing workshop for us 5 evenings a week, starting on the 7th of December. And we have an event on the 30th of November with Darren Nigrifa and Sarah Baum. And we also have a number of events planned for December, which we'll be announcing very soon as well. So just keep an eye on our website and our social media, and hopefully we'll see you all at these events again. And hopefully we'll see you all in Bantry very soon again. So other than that, thank you all, and congratulations, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.